A consistent theme in Marcus Zuzak's novel, The Book Thief, is defiance. Liesel, Hans, and Max all defy authority in several instances throughout the book. They also exhibit great courage through these actions. But is Zuzak implying that defiance is necessary? Does he encourage defiance? In order to understand the author's intent, the character's traits, actions, and motives must be closely evaluated. Liesel Memminger. At the beginning of the novel, she is a young, illiterate orphan. She is not portrayed as someone who would be openly defiant. She's just a kid, grieving over the loss of her mom and brother. Liesel is also a German, in Nazi Germany. She goes to Hitler Youth meetings. All of these things lead the audience to assume that Liesel Memminger is not likely to rebel against authority. But then, she does. A German child goes against her own by taking one book, a book on fire, from a pile of forbidden literature that was labeled as anti-Hitler, anti-Nazi, and therefore anti-German. The narrator states, "She latched on to the closest of the books. Smoke lifted from the cover." This act required a great amount of courage. So what was her motivation to steal? The author states, "A small section of living material slipped from inside the ash. 3 books. Survivors." Liesel saw the words as living things, something that needed to be treasured and in this case, rescued. Just as her first act of defiance involved taking, Liesel's second act involves giving. Liesel and Rudy leave pieces of bread for Jews on their way to concentration camps. There was a trace of a grin on her face as she handed out the pieces of bread on the road. Even though helping any Jew was considered a punishable offense, Liesel chose to do it anyway. But why would she risk her own safety for someone else? She saw the value of each Jewish life, just as her foster father did when he gave bread to a starving Jew. Your papa did. How could she argue? There was an aspect of human rights that Liesel was able to recognize and to honor. Hans Huberman is arguably one of the most symbolic characters throughout the novel. He is presented as a quiet, peaceful house painter. He seems unlikely to defy authority openly. Hans is a German. He served in the First World War for Germany. He is living in a culture that is telling him to hate. Readers would presume that he wouldn't dare protest any actions of the Nazi Party. But he does. His first act of defiance appears numerous times in the novel. Hans agrees to hide a Jew in his basement. In the beginning of Part 4, a question is asked by a weak and starving Jew, and an answer is given by an average German citizen. Do you still play the accordion? Of course I do. Hans, of course, is the German, and by agreeing to help a Jew, he is putting himself and his family in danger. In a sea of anti-Semitism, he protects and befriends a Jew. Why would someone take such a great risk to protect a near stranger? The narrator states, a Jew had once saved his life, and he couldn't forget that. Hans has already shown that he looked beyond ethnicity and the outside appearance, and his second act of defiance involves that same type of fairness. Hans announces to a Nazi Party member that he can no longer join the Nazi Party. This may not seem like a massive problem to the reader, but your status in the Nazi Party meant everything in Hitler's Germany. People who were not part of the party were regarded with suspicion. What, then, was Hans's motivation to risk his social standing? The author states, he witnessed 4 men throw several bricks into one of the few Jewish shops that was still in operation. Hans saw unjust attacks against Jews by the very group he was expected to join. He saw the value of humanity, even when the people around him did not. Throughout the novel, the Huberman basement became a safe haven for an outcast. Max is a Jew, hated by his own country, but taken in by Hans. Max is an angry, strong-willed fist fighter. However, out of the 3 main characters, Max is the only one who does not show open defiance. Instead, the narrator states, for the next 2 years, he remained in hiding, in an empty storeroom. In order to stay alive, he had to become invisible. However, his motivation was not simply to stay alive, but to defy the Nazi Party and death itself. When death captures me, he will fill my fist in his face. This defiant attitude contributes to keeping Max alive. However, Max does not simply survive, He also defies the Nazi Party by thriving and connecting with a German family. This connection is described by the narrator. At least once a day, Hans Huberman would descend the steps and share a conversation. Rosa would occasionally bring a spare crust of bread. Liesel appeared each time with a new weather report. Hitler's goal was to crush the Jews. By thriving, Max was defying authority in secret. In order to comprehend the author's intent, the character's attributes, actions, and intentions must be closely examined. Throughout the novel The Book Thief, Zuzak implies that human defiance is necessary in scenarios where dignity and human life are at stake. The author also illustrates courage in each of the characters' actions. Despite the opposite opinions, threats, and hatred Liesel, Hans, and Max are surrounded by, they still do what is right.